It is a rare occasion that the story of a World War II aviator makes national headlines. But recently, that's exactly what happened.
President Biden has now been making the rounds recently, telling a terrible tale. The tale is of his uncle.
Biden was describing how his Uncle Bossy's plane was shot down in the war, and he went on to say this.
And his uncle was on board a U.S. military aircraft. It was after D-Day. His uncle went down in Papua New Guinea while fighting in the Pacific Campaign.
President Biden suggested earlier this month that his uncle was eaten by a tribe of cannibals during World War II.
His plane crashed in this terrible incident, and he was eventually eaten by cannibals.
Once I saw this clip going viral, I knew that I had to do my own work to see what really happened and to find out if this was right. So, after diving into the records and searching the National Archives, I have found out what really happened to President Biden's uncle and the true story of his final mission during World War II. It is May 14th of 1944. The forces of Douglas MacArthur have recently taken the southern portion of Papua New Guinea, forcing the Japanese off of the valuable stretch of land. Here, from one of their newly captured islands, an American aircraft is taking off from the Momote airfield, 300 miles north of New Guinea. Unbeknown to her crew, this would be her final mission. And on board of this aircraft would be the uncle of President Joseph Biden, Second Lieutenant Ambrose J. Finnegan, Jr. But what exactly was this mission, and what happened? To start with, let's see what was actually recently said by the president himself.
And my uncle, they called him Ambrose, they called him Bosie, my Uncle Bosie, and he became an Army Air Corps before the Air Force came along. He flew those single-engine planes as reconnaissance over war zones. He got shot down in New Guinea, and they never found the body because there were a lot of cannibals for real in that part of New Guinea.
According to the story that he told here, Second Lieutenant Finnegan flew single-engine aircraft on recon missions, and then he was shot down and possibly eaten by cannibals. To start with, who was Lieutenant Finnegan? Although the claims made here make it sound like he was a member of a combat crew, this is not actually the case. His job, in fact, was quite an interesting one. According to military records that I was able to pull, Ambrose Finnegan was in fact assigned to the 3rd Bomb Group of the 5th Air Force, but was a courier, not a combat crew member. A courier was a position that involved the transport and delivery of messages or packages, often sensitive ones, between bases on the front lines. This position played a key role in many aspects of communication, especially with confidential departments like that of code breaking and cryptography. And this brings us to the actual assignment of this mission: a courier flight taking a message between 2 important air bases. This flight would see the aircraft fly from Momote Airfield to Nasdab Airfield, 300 miles south, where Lieutenant Finnegan would arrive and deliver his message. Next, the aircraft. The plane that was taking off on May 14th with Lieutenant Finnegan was an A-20 Havoc. This A-20 was a twin-engine medium bomber that was used across all theaters of war, but saw particular success for the Army Air Corps in the Pacific, where Japanese flak was not quite as deadly as that of the Germans, and low-level strafing and bombing became the tactic of choice. Because of that, the A-20 saw a great amount of use in airfield and shipping attacks, utilizing a heavy machine gun armament and time-delayed bombs dropped from treetop altitudes. But for this mission, no combat was expected. Being a courier mission over friendly territory, this was certainly not a recon flight, as claimed, and was technically not even a combat mission. In fact, this particular aircraft had recently been assigned to a non-combat role. And pay attention because I believe that this part is very important to the story. This A-20 Havoc, an aircraft by the name of Barry's Baby, was a seasoned combat veteran. She was named after Barry Ferris, the editor-in-chief of the International News Service, after he paid a visit to the airbase on a reporting trip in April, hence the INS on her side. Just a few weeks earlier, Barry's Baby had been a combat flyer for the 90th Bomb Squadron and was one of the participants of the famous Black Sunday mission on April 16th of 1944. Here, the 5th Air Force put up a massive force to bomb the airfield and town of Hollandia. This would consist of more than 170 planes, including A-20s, B-24s, B-25s, and P-38s. Although the actual bombing mission itself was successful, on the way back to their bases, the American flight encountered a massive thunderstorm that caused more than 40 aircraft to be damaged or lost while attempting to make it home. One of these aircraft would be Barry's Baby. Upon her attempted return to base, she was forced to make a belly landing, and this would not go well. After hitting the runway, the Havoc slid across the slick mud and collided with a parked P-47 named Dirty Old Man. The crash here was so violent that the pilot of Barry's Baby had to be cut out of the aircraft, but somehow everyone survived. As for Barry's Baby though, she was never the same. Although she was able to be repaired, not everything was in perfect working order because she was regulated to non-combat flying status, implying that not everything was up to par. And I believe that it is this that would play a major role in what happened next. A few weeks later, on May 14th, the courier flight from Momote to New Guinea was underway. And everything went as planned for the first half hour. The crew of the A-20 were at their positions, scanning the skies and keeping the aircraft on track. Lieutenant Ambrose Finnegan, no doubt, was quietly sitting in the back, clutching his all-important message. But then, unexpectedly, disaster struck. Both engines quickly began to lose power and thrust from the aircraft started to dwindle. Captain Harold Prince, the pilot of the ship, immediately began to drop altitude, realizing that ditching in the Pacific was quickly becoming the best available option. But as Barry's Baby got closer to the water at just 30 feet of altitude, things went from bad to worse. Here, both engines experienced a total failure and loss of power, causing Barry's Baby to turn over and strike the water hard. Immediately, the impact threw everyone on board with great force, and it became every man for himself as the aircraft quickly began to sink below the water. Only one man would arise from the waves, however, engineer and gunner Sergeant Anthony Zolkis. After staying afloat in the Pacific for a short time, Zolkis was rescued by an American barge and taken to a hospital, where he would eventually recover from his wounds. But for the rest of the crew, nothing was ever found. Throughout the next day, search flights were sent, but no remains of the aircraft nor signs of the crew were ever located. This leads to the almost certain conclusion that the other 3 men on board, including Lieutenant Ambrose Finnegan, were killed during the crash, coming to rest at the bottom of the Pacific. But because their remains were never found, they are still officially listed as missing in action. Because of the fact that the men on board of Barry's Baby were not on a combat flight, nor engaged by the enemy, their loss was not considered combat related. This means that none of them received Purple Hearts, and their loss was marked as a non-battle casualty. So, unfortunately, the claims that he was shot down are also false by all of the available records. And finally, as far as the cannibalism claims, there is truly no evidence to support that Lieutenant Finnegan ever survived the crash, much less that he was met by cannibals. If I had to guess, I would imagine that this is some confusion between the shootdown of former President George Bush, whose fellow crew members on his plane were in fact eaten by cannibals. But these were starving Japanese soldiers on a different island, not the locals in New Guinea, who were generally friendly towards Americans. But nonetheless, Lieutenant Finnegan, as well as the other 3 crew members lost on Barry's Baby, would go down in the Pacific, sacrificing their lives in service of their country. Hopefully, videos like this can help make sure that they are remembered appropriately. Please keep the comments civil and history related. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.